I move that resolutions 823, 824, and 826 be placed upon final consideration. Well, no, that's, and do pass in a block. Is that what I'm?
Be adopted in a block.
And be adopted in a block.
All right, it has been moved and seconded. Questions or comments from members of council? Councilman Cashman.
Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem. Much has been made over the past year or so regarding the connection or lack of a connection between the Platte to Park Hill Drainage Project and the proposed Central 70 highway reconstruction. Opponents to Central 70 are adamant the two are interrelated. Proponents say Central 70 can go on without it, and P2P is merely redundant. I've spent more than a little time over the past year or so researching the topic, and my conclusion is that not only are P2P and I-70 tightly interwoven, the city is far more than merely an interested party. We're a fully involved partner in facilitating the highway project that I believe will have long-reaching negative effects on the communities, North Denver communities through which it passes. And I'd like to read a few things from the IGA that was run through this council just a few weeks before a new majority of council members took office in 2015. So I'm just going to read you some excerpts. Whereas the parties, meaning the city and the state, have determined that there are significant mutual benefits to be achieved by cooperating and working together on the I-70 East project and related enhancements. Whereas to the extent permitted by the NEPA process and applicable federal, state, and local laws and regulations, it is the intent of the parties to set forth their understandings and goals with regard to their respective commitments for funding parts of the costs of the I-70 East project. The parties believe the Twin Basin Drainage Project is a necessary and important drainage project with benefits for the state and the city respectively. If the Early Action Drainage Project, which is part of P2P, if the Early Action Drainage Project segment from Pond 7 to the South Platte River is not operational by December 1, 2017, or the remainder of the EADP is not operational by September 1, 2019, and this delays the I-70 East project, the city will enforce the liquidated damages provision and reimburse the state for actual additional costs to the I-70 East project in the amount of liquidated damages from the city's contractor. The state believes the Twin Basin Drainage Project will result in significant benefits for the I-70 East project and will result in a redundant storm protection system for the I-70 East project. As a result, the state will pay 40% of the cost of the project, estimated at $53.6 million, and the city will pay 60% of the cost, estimated at $80.4 million. The city agrees that its ongoing drainage plans, policies, and regulations will be developed with the goal of maintaining the functional capacity of the Twin Basin Drainage Project to handle the 100-year flood. If the final cost for the project for drainage elements exceeds $134 million, it is the agreement of the parties that any amount above $134 million will be funded, 60% by the city and 40% by the state, provided, however, that the state obligation for any amount in $53.6 million shall not exceed an additional $6.9 million. And finally, CDOT shall have the right to review all plans for the Twin Basin Drainage Project, including the Early Action Drainage Project. CDOT will provide comments focused on the functionality of the drainage plans. When plans for the EADP have achieved 30% design, the city shall submit the plans to CDOT for review and comment. CDOT will have 10 business days to review and comment. And the same is true for the 60% and 100% design period. I believe that CDOT could indeed have provided the needed redundancy for the I-70 project on their own dime, but I believe they've chosen not to do so because it's in their financial interest to partner with the city. I believe if they were going to provide their own redundancy, it would cost far more than their contribution to the city, and I believe that because I do not know CDOT to be intentionally benevolent folks, I guess they're figuring it's a heck of a good deal, and so a partnership with the city makes good sense to them. We continue to struggle to gain full participation from CDOT in mitigating the construction effects on nearby homeowners. Were I to have had a chance to vote on this IGA, I would have suggested that the money we are gaining to help with the P2P project was not sufficient to facilitate the continued debasement of the neighborhoods that this oversized, misplaced, and misguided boondoggle will pass through. That being said, Mr. President, I will be voting no on these three bills tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilman Cashman. Councilwoman Black?
Thank you, Mr. President. When people ask me what is the most surprising thing about being on City Council, I have said for the past 2 years that it's drainage. It's something I never thought about before I was a City Council member, but now everywhere I go, I see drainage basins and ditches that the city and urban drainage and government entities have built in order to protect our neighborhoods and our city from a serious rain event. In 2013, we all remember the horrible floods that we had that destroyed a lot of communities and a lot of homes. I do support these projects. They will protect our city and our neighborhoods. There's been a lot of misinformation out there, and I just want to be clear on some things. Number one, the City Park Golf Course is not going to be destroyed. It is going to be improved into a more beautiful and accessible course. CU alumnus and Hall of Fame golfer Hale Irwin is designing it so that players of all abilities can play golf together. The new design will attract younger players, and it will be more inclusive. It will also incorporate facilities for the First Tee program for children. The historic character of the golf course and views will be preserved. And of the 824 existing trees, 561 will be preserved, and 760 new trees will be planted on the course or in the area with a net gain of almost 500 trees. We actually have our city forester here tonight who can answer more questions about the trees. But many of the trees that will be cut down are already stressed or damaged. They also will replace the tree canopy. So if you think of a large tree and the size of the canopy of the branches and the leaves, they'll replace it with as many smaller trees that will create that same area of canopy. Many of Denver's parks are already drainage areas to mitigate floods. Just this morning, I rode my bike around Bible Park, which is a drainage area. The other day, I ran in Paul Cashman's district on the Harvard Gulch, which is a great path, and it is a drainage area. Also in my district, we have the Goldsmith Gulch that goes through Wallace Park, Rosamond Park, and Bible Park, and it's a drainage area. Using parks and green spaces for drainage is a natural, smart way to mitigate a major flood. So with that said, I will be supporting these contracts.
All right, thanks, Councilwoman Black. Councilwoman Gilmore.
Thank you, President Brooks. Protecting people and property from floodwaters is of the utmost importance. I know that we all agree on that, and I'd like to humbly share a little bit about my background so that you can put into context my next comments. For close to 25 years, I worked within the field of natural resources. I started out at the Colorado Department of Natural Resources when Ken Salazar served as the executive director. I have also worked for Colorado State Parks and the Colorado Division of Wildlife, which is now merged into the Colorado Division of Parks and Wildlife. I began my career when the number of women and people of color within federal, state, and city natural resource agencies were in the single digits, and sadly to say, we still are. I have dedicated my entire adult life to educating people and advocating for responsible and science-led management in regard to our precious natural resources. Prior to being elected to serve my community as the District 11 Councilwoman, I was the Executive Director for Environmental Learning for Kids, a nonprofit organization I started in far northeast Denver, which is dedicated to educating a diverse population of youth and their families in science, technology, engineering and math, and natural resource issues. During my tenure with ELK, I researched, wrote, and implemented many U.S. Environmental Protection Agency grants related to environmental justice and environmental education. I have supervised and directly implemented educational programs involving watersheds, water quality, including point and non-point source pollution, and monthly analysis of local creeks, including Westerly and Sand Creek, for pH, hardness, alkalinity, and other environmental variables through the River Watch program, which is supported by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. First and foremost, this is a stormwater management project. We must direct the flow of stormwater to detention ponds, and the City Park Golf Course makes the most sense. City Park Golf Course is not a native ecosystem. A native ecosystem in this geographic location, as the majority of Denver, is a short grass prairie. It would be rolling fields of prairie grasslands with the historic Montclair Creek meandering through the prairie landscape. This creek is where the rain and snow melt would go on its way to the South Platte River. The historic Montclair Creek riparian zone would move water through this landscape and slowly help the water filtrate through riparian vegetation, much like a sponge would work to clean our water naturally before it drains into our rivers and becomes the drinking water for folks downstream in northeast Colorado, where my family lives in Brush, Colorado, and on out to Nebraska. This design will help recreate the historic ecological representation of what was here, and it will consist of riparian areas and prairie uplands, and will sustain cottonwoods, willows, and other trees and vegetation that will create a wider diversity of wildlife habitat. The City Park Golf Course is a human-created, overwatered ecosystem created to sustain the non-native turf and the trees that have been planted. The majority of trees that you see in a native prairie habitat would be cottonwoods growing along a creek because of their need for a reliable water source. We have an opportunity through this stormwater management project to create a more naturalized native landscape, which will highlight what was here historically. Along with creating a more historic environment, the most recent email from Public Works shows that their team, along with the design team, have worked incredibly hard to not only mitigate the loss of trees, but to enhance the urban canopy with the addition of hundreds of trees. This landscape will be more sustainable and will consist of wetlands areas that will filtrate stormwater drainage, which many times can contain oil, pesticides, and fertilizers. Pretty much anything you put on your lawn or in your driveway or on the streets, when it rains, we know the roads flood, and all of that stormwater has to go somewhere. We will improve upon the non-native environment of the City Park Golf Course, and this is good, sound, natural resource management. The bottom line is that along with properly implementing this stormwater management project, we should also stay focused on the public safety and safety of property regarding floodwaters that rise in this area, because there is not currently proper stormwater infrastructure in place. I will be voting in favor of this stormwater management project. Thank you, President Brooks.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gilmore. Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem. So I think it's important to go back and talk about the fact that we had not only an IGA between Denver and CDOT, but there was a proclamation that was brought forward on the CDOT preferred alternative that was approved by City Council before the supplemental draft of the environmental impact statement was released. I did not support that at the time. I did not support the IGA, nor the rate increase that was followed, which included a $300 million increase to the ratepayers in Denver. I believe there is a need for drainage in the Cole neighborhood. The Montclair Basin was one of the twin basins. There is a separately funded effort or planning process that's underway right now for that particular basin. But I think it's also important to note that when this Twin Basin project, which is now called the P2P, Platte to Park Hill project, was brought forward, this was not in the wastewater 5-year plan. It was pushed to the front of the line, and clearly it was to look at how to coordinate the two projects. And I actually had advocated that the $40 million CDOT originally was going to spend on drainage for I-70 should be utilized because the city started talking about trying to address the coal flooding problem. But the project went from $40 million to what I just mentioned, $300 million. And I'm not sure we've seen the end of the costs just yet. Now, 8 short years ago, the Globeville neighborhood had been taken out of the floodplain because of work that the city had done to make changes to the river corridor. And those low-income residents no longer had to purchase flood insurance. Now, fast forward to seeing a lot of the new development that's going on in this area. Anything that is less than 1 acre does not have to do any on-site storm drainage. That's runoff that goes into our sewer system and into the river. We now have a new 33rd outfall that was done as a result of the RTD projects for the A-line. So that's additional water going into the river. And then when you add all of the water from this particular project, that's even more water that now dumps into the Globeville Landing outfall, which is a little park right behind the Pepsi-Cola plant. For anybody that's trying to develop in the Globeville neighborhood, they are now having to build 4-foot-high 4-foot-high foundations to protect their buildings from, being flooded. So when this project came forward, we learned that Globeville will now be called an inundation area. This is not, they're not calling it, they're back in the floodplain, but it's an inundation area that is now requiring anybody who comes through our community planning and development agency that wants to build in Globeville on the west side of the river, they have to have a 4-foot-high foundation. My understanding is that residents will also be required to have to start getting flood insurance again until that problem is resolved. I had asked our Public Works Department to address this problem for Globeville. Given the fact that this project was put to the front of the line, there was no reason we couldn't solve the other problem at the same time. That didn't happen. So we were told we want to wait for the Army Corps of Engineering study that's being done on the river, and we're looking at probably 10 years before Globeville may see some relief to this problem. We're talking about a community that's being impacted with National Western, with I-70, with Brighton Boulevard improvements, with all the development going on in these neighborhoods. We're going to see Washington Street redone. There'll be an Excel pipeline that will go down the Washington Street corridor. So we're talking about a lot of impact to just this small neighborhood alone. Yet we made no effort to try to figure out how to solve this problem. So for all of these reasons, I have not been on board. I do think there is an issue that needs to be resolved with drainage, but I am not supportive of these 3 bills being approved to move forward. Has nothing to do with well-qualified people who have been selected to do this project. I actually have friends that are part of the team, but Those are the reasons why I will not be supporting these three bills tonight. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ortega. Councilman Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've had this topic in our chambers a few times, and at the Jetsons.
To those viewers at home, there was a weird noise that happened. So just to catch everybody
Millennials
up.
don't know who the Jetsons are. This topic has been in front of us a few times, and I have a very intimate relationship with it. You know, back in the day in 2003, I was one of the folks that went door to door with the survey, knocking on doors, getting the community input. Kevin, you know all about, you remember this, yeah. I think Kevin wrote the story that I was quoted in, but I was a young guy, and we knocked on every single door from Globeville all the way to Green Valley Ranch. Every single one of those. It took us about 7 or 8 months to do, and we got, you know, everybody along that I-70 corridor, and we got valuable input from folks that said, we don't want this highway in our neighborhood. We don't want the highway in our neighborhood, right? But if we had the choice, right, we reroute it or bury it, right? It's better than this thing that is just above our neighborhood, separating, creating this, casting this shadow. So I get it. You know, ever since then, you know, I went through the process, and I saw that it took almost a decade just to make a decision on something that was obvious, right? I mean, it is a big deal, and you know, a lot of the advocates then are no longer around, but a lot of the residents still feel very strongly about it. And when this proclamation came in front of us, I voted no, because I believed in a reroute. Now, it was very unfortunate that we didn't go that direction. I think it was a tremendous mistake historically from the state and the city to not fight for the reroute. Now we have what's in front of us, and I look at this through another lens, and that is a lens of someone who's chaired the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District for 2 years. Now, I never thought that that this would be exciting or fun. You are talking about hydrology, you know, drainage, but I learned a heck of a lot, and I chaired this for 2 years, and I chaired it through the floods that we had in Boulder County and then up in Longmont, and realized that the infrastructure that they lacked there, we had in Aurora and the eastern part of our metro area. And we were even hit harder than they were. But if you remember the pictures, their houses they were the ones that took it. They're the ones that got the hard, they were the hardest hit, lost their property, lost their homes, lost their lives. That's what happens when you don't have the infrastructure in place. They weren't part of the FCD, or they weren't part of the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District. They decided not to opt into that a while back. So in looking at this through that lens, it is absolutely critical that we have the infrastructure in place for those neighborhoods, right? Now, I find myself in a hard position because here I am thinking about my work and as somebody who went door to door, and my work as a councilman, and our vote against the current plan, and our vote against the proclamation. And I come to realize that even if you vote no on this, it's not gonna bring back the reroute. Voting no on these bills will not magically bring back the reroute. And that is what the primary thing that the residents wanted, was the reroute or it lowered. And you absolutely, this is my absolute truth, that is right, what I remember from that. all those doors, 8,000 doors that we knocked on, right? People who I sat in interviews for almost 45 minutes a piece. Those are the two things. If it's not rerouted, put it under. If there's no drainage, let's say that this is all for let's say folks are right, this is all just to support, what's going to happen on I-70. All you're going to have is another bridge for another 100 years. And now, I get it. I get that there's folks that don't live there that stand in solidarity. There's folks that are concerned about the golf course and the impacts that it'll make to the golf course. I get it. I respect that. I respect the solidarity. But you don't have to live with another bridge over your head for 100 years. The folks in Elyria, Swansea, and Globeville do. And all those neighborhoods, all the way up to past around Colorado, that's what they said. That was the thing that stuck in my mind. And I have to tell this story over and over because I see a lot of new faces that are in the room and new colleagues. And, I make this decision not lightly, but just with that intimate knowledge. Another elevated option cannot exist there. Not on my watch. It is I-70 was a grand mistake a long time ago, and it still is a headache. But killing the drainage for it isn't going to bring back the reroute, guys. And I fear that killing the drainage only if it does go through and if all the stars lined up, right? You're only building another elevated bridge, and that is the absolute last thing that should happen on that route. So I will be supporting the three bills ahead of us. I did also support the delay, and because that is our right on council. That was something that was made clear to us a long time ago, and we should always have room for that dialogue on that process. So thank you, Mr. President. This is about lives and property everywhere, right? Both in Elyria and Swansea and Globeville, with the remediation and areas that would be impacted by flooding. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Lopez. Councilman Flynn?
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week, I joined Councilman Espinoza and others in supporting a delay in this final consideration of this contract because I believe that we should always take the time any member of this council wants to take within the time we are allotted to look over these contracts. We get such precious little time as it is, and I hope that with Councilwoman Ortega we can take a look at that as a group very soon, how we do contracts. I also wanted to thank Councilwoman Ortega for reminding everyone that this Platte to Park Hill, I always thought it should be Park Hill to Platte because water flows downhill, doesn't flow uphill, but I didn't get to name it. That the project grew way too much, too fast, and as I said last week, is by a significant factor larger than anything wastewater has ever done in a single bite. And it just gives me heartburn to have seen it grown from, I believe it was actually 134 million when you combine CDOT and the city, to nearly 300 million. Without enough engineering being done, without 30% design being done on every element that was going to be built, which I regard as normal process. And so I wish that it hadn't happened that way. I voted against the stormwater fee increase. Councilman Cashman reminded everybody how just 2 weeks before the 7 new members were sworn in, I believe I was sitting out in the second row there and watched the council pass the IGA that kind of locked us into this direction. And I regret that. But at this point, I think to use these contracts as a de facto substitute for the plaintiffs in the MacFarlane case to file and seek an injunction after we pass the contracts, I don't think the council should act in the place of the plaintiff and give a de facto injunction by killing these contracts. So I look forward to the trial in, I believe, 2 weeks. And I am reminded that despite, and I mentioned this last week, despite the optimism of our staff, I'm reminded of the City Park Pavilion case where the Friends of City Park defeated the city's plan to convert the pavilion into Parks headquarters, and how shocked everybody was at that. And I remember the headlines from, it was I think Judge Flowers in district court, who said that it was not an appropriate use of city parkland. So I look forward to the trial, but I just don't think that this council should substitute its judgment on these contracts by handing the plaintiffs in what in essence is an injunction that they have not yet sought themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Flynn. Councilman Clark?
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I just want to say thank you here to all the constituents who've reached out, engaged with me, sat down over coffee and had great conversations with me. We're really smart, passionate people on both sides of this issue. I really appreciate that dialogue. I spent my entire career prior to this working along the South Platte River. That's why my water bottle says SPR for South Platte River on one side and Greenway Foundation, the nonprofit dedicated to the river, on the other side. I carry it not just on my water bottle, but in everything that I do, and it's Denver's river. I carry it in my heart. So I also take issue with the name of this, but not for the same reasons that Councilman Flynn took up, but because the Platte River is not Denver's river. The Platte River runs elsewhere. This is the South Platte River, and so we should stop calling it Platte to Park Hill. It should be South Platte. When we were considering the fee increase to our stormwater, fees, I met extensively with CDOT and with the folks who I think the absolute world of at the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District. I dug in deeply into this, and there was one thing that was glaring for me after having those meetings, and that was that it is better for the South Platte River to do this drainage project in conjunction with what is happening at I-70. I won't get up here and talk about IGA has gone past or whether I-70 redo is a good idea or not. What I know is that if we don't do this, we will once again be turning our back on the South Platte River. And we did that for a really long time, and we destroyed the river. And it has taken since 1974, when the Greenway Foundation built the first park and the first trail. Imagine that, a Denver with 0 parks and 0 trails along the South Platte River and the Cherry Creek. I can't imagine it, in part because I wasn't alive in 1974, but also because it's not a city that I would want to live in. And we have been clawing our way back since 1974 in a hole that we dug. And a vote against this drainage project does not stop the I-70 project. But what it does do, it will directly lead to dirtier water in the South Platte River, because the I-70 project can continue on without this, and they can put dirtier water in the river. And so for that reason, that I wanted to highlight why I will be supporting this tonight. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman Clark. Councilman New?
Thank you, Mr. President. Even though, I think this project has a relationship to I-70, I think the most important thing to me is the flood mitigation part of this whole project. I spent, my background was hospital management for well over, I won't even say 30 years, but a long, long time. And I went through several floods with hospitals that I managed, and it was devastating. The amount of damage to buildings and all the residential areas around our hospitals was just incredible. So I just have the greatest respect for the flood mitigation part of this that's going to be helpful to all those residents in Cole and all along that whole route of P2P. So this flood mitigation is extremely important to me. Also, keep in mind, now this is, I think it's like over a $300 million project, but it's only part of a $1.5 billion plan of mitigation for our city. This is like deferred maintenance. I mean, it's stuff we need to be doing. This plan was developed a couple years ago. So we've got to be respectful to what our city needs in terms of total flood mitigation. I think this is extremely important. Now I'll put my golfer's hat on, and I'm an avid golfer, and I played City Park Golf Course, and it can be improved and needs to be improved. It has the most wonderful views of our city, but this is an opportunity to make it a better course. Hale Irwin, our own Colorado Buffalo golfer, is going to do an incredible job of redesigning that course and making it something that's notable. Our golf course right now is not notable. It's a good public golf course, but it's not a great course. It could be something that could be much more important to our city and to all the people who play golf like myself. But the most important thing is flood mitigation. We've got to implement this total $1.5 billion plan over time, and this is the first part of it. So I'll be supporting these tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilman New. Councilwoman Sussman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks to my colleagues for their comments, and thanks to all that wrote emails to us all. First of all, I'd like to, I also sat on the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District for 4 years, and like Councilman Black, I never knew that I'd really be interested in drainage and outfalls and all the vocabulary that I learned. Certainly learned a lot about this particular issue down in the lower Montclair Basin. Councilman Flynn, the reason why one would call it the South Platte to Park Hill is while water flows downhill, you always start a drainage project from the outfall, from where the water is going. You don't start a project from where the water starts. So that's why I think since the engineers probably named it, they did South Platte to Park Hill. We have known on the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, we have known about, of course, the lower Montclair Basin is the biggest flooding issue we have in the city of Denver. We have had it for years. We have all, on the UDFCD, we didn't know how we were ever going to really manage that flooding problem that we have there. While the I-70 project is kind of related, it's because they were going to bury or put below ground part of their highway that they were going to run into the lower Montclair Basin issue. And they were going to spend the money to help the drainage on their little part, and if we don't, and instead they decided to partner with the UDFCD and with Denver, and to use the dollars that they were going to use to give to the city to also work finally on the lower Montclair Basin. I've really appreciated that comments that Councilman Lopez made, that not voting for this doesn't mean the I-70 project goes away. I'd like to turn that around and say, whether the I-70 project is built or not, the drainage problem is staying. If the I-70 project were rerouted, the drainage problem is going to stay. If the project goes through, the drainage problem is going to stay. If we stopped I-70 and made it a boulevard, the drainage problem stays. We have the drainage problem regardless of what I-70 is doing. And most importantly for my district, although this isn't related to the lower Montclair Basin, I firmly believe we need to fix that basin, and this is an opportunity to do it. The large project that Councilman New referred to is going to help my district, which is in the upper Montclair Basin. And I don't know if those of you are aware, but about every 2 or 3 years, we get a flood that up at 14th and Jersey and Jasmine and Kearney, where we have cars floating down the street. I spent this summer of a night of the summer of 2013 with the first responders saving people that were floating in their cars, if you can imagine, down Jasmine and 13th and 14th. And the larger project is finally going to help us address the upper Montclair Basin. But I will be supporting this tonight because of the serious need that our lower Montclair Basin needs, whether or not I-70 were going to be enlarged. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sussman. Councilman New, you didn't pop back in. Is that just a system here? Okay. Councilman Espinoza.
Sorry, I feel like I should chime in since I called this out last week specifically to ask the administration to consider essentially postponing and putting in a clause or something for tree protection. We did get so I just want everyone to know that I did make an ask. Specifically, I said that I pointed out that the highest inundation levels north of City Park in a 100-year event, as modeled and in that stormwater plan, is 2 to 4 feet. And that, so what I asked him is, because of a known breach in the Platte River levee, there's a levee called the Gloveville levee that's on the western bank, protects Gloveville. There's a known breach in that. Because of that known breach, there are several 100-year events that can occur upstream from Gloveville. Remember, the South Platte River runs south to north. There are several 100-year events that can flood Gloveville to an inundation level of 15 feet. And that can happen multiple ways. The only way you do this in the lower Montclair Basin is through a 100-year event in the lower Montclair Basin. So I asked the administration to help me understand how in a $386 million commitment to urban drainage, an $863 million commitment to the National Western Center, and now a $934 million GeoBond ask. So those doing the math, that's over $1 billion, closer to $2 billion. How we didn't address Gloveville. And then I went on to proceed, and I don't understand the rationale, because that stormwater management plan that was referenced didn't include these solutions, as Debbie Ortega had mentioned. It did include some solutions, but you don't need a 39th Avenue channel, and you don't need City Park. You don't need them both. You need one, and either one of those solutions solves both basins. Because the waters today that go through City Park, they actually outfall at the Gloveville outfall landing, or the Gloveville landing outfall. But because we're now taking water from a different basin and cutting that off through the 39th Avenue channel, we have to hoard that water somewhere in order to preserve the 100-year capacity of that channel, not for the park, but for CDOT. And so, I appreciate my colleagues on council sort of bringing this up and bringing this to light, the sort of sense of urgency and connecting it to the Platte to Park Hill. Because the response to council to date and publicly about why this was needed was because there was a sort of finite window in which you can do this work and deliver this thing and still keep golf course sort of viable because of the growing season. And when you have to plant sod and plant trees and what have you. Well, guess what? That happens every year. So we haven't done this to City Park since its creation, and now we have to do it in this window. We can't wait till next year's window or the next year's window. Why? Why? Is because of somehow something we're not talking about, the administration's not talking about, but this council is very clear on it. It's because this is needed in order to preserve CDOT's capacity to use the stormwater capacity of the 39th Avenue channel for CDOT, for the highway. And so I argued, I pushed back. I got a response. It was no. I pushed back and said, because I was asking, why not just complete the design? We're at 30% design. Involve the community. Because again, the administration is not talking about the connection here. So I just pushed and I said, why not complete the design, work with the community, complete the course design, hire Hale Irwin to do a fantastic job on the future of City Park. Maybe we could do more tree preservation in the process, get that clubhouse nailed down in the interim while you're preparing to do this project next year. And then hire Saunders, capable contractor, very, very good, to do this work. The answer was no. And it's because of, like I said, what we're talking about here tonight. And so this was not about, this is somehow going to kill I-70. It's not. I don't think anybody who's really trying to fight for City Park and the preservation of that asset is saying that this thing is going to kill I-70. Because no, they will then put in their stormwater detention that they are not getting from 39th Avenue channel into their project. They'll have to. And guess what? They'll have stormwater mitigation and water quality requirements for that for that detention that they put in, their 100-year thing. I can assure you that if a 100-year event hit City Park or the 39th Avenue channel, the water quality measures go away, because at that level of inundation, there's water just moving. The water quality measures are there for lower flows. And so the reality is that we could actually drain these flows that go through City Park and inundate areas north of City Park directly into the 39th Avenue channel today, help, actually solve the drainage problems per the master plan for both the two basins with just the 39th Avenue channel and some additional work. And then City Park flows will go exactly where they always were going historically, to Globeville outfall, or Globeville landing. We are, so it's sort of a fallacy that we have to do this per an IGA. The Twin Basin solution is still solved. It's just not solved to the degree that CDOT would want us to. And in order to do that, we're taking on this additional work, and we're obligating, a significant portion of the $400 million, which you are getting through your stormwater fees, which you did not vote for, and not solving real flood issues in Globeville and in other neighborhoods citywide, because we have taken on this agreement to sort of leverage. So the thing is, the right thing to do is for City Park is to say, let's complete the design and move on. But if you vote for this, you're basically saying, look, I am putting the priorities of CDOT over this asset of the people of Denver. With that, I'll be joining my colleague, Councilman Cashman, in voting no. And that's it. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Espinoza. I will go last, much to the cheering of the audience. This is my district, and I represent this deal. And I got to say, from the very beginning, I was very frustrated with the administration for how they came talking to the community around this thing. It was not well done. It wasn't well communicated. And we had a lot of intense arguments and conversations about it, and a lot of open meetings that were very frustrating. Since then, I feel like the administration really began to turn towards the community and reach out to the community and set up. We're talking about City Park here. I know we've talked about a lot of different things, but the City Park folks, the North City Park, the City Park West neighborhood, and put together a stakeholder committee to begin working through the issues around this golf course and this drainage problem. And so let me start by saying, when we talk about the lower Montclair Basin, it's been said in ways, but let me be very clear, it's the worst basin in the city. It is the worst basin in the city. And in 2011, when I first got elected, and we had a storm like we do in the summers, and people's cars were floating down the street. Everybody remembers it then, right? You got the emails, Councilman Brooks, you just got elected. What are you going to do about this? How will you address this? And I wasn't on the urban drainage like many of the members here, and I started researching ways that cities do this. The most important work that a city can do is build infrastructure. It's the most important work, but it's stuff that no one wants to pay for, and the public really doesn't understand or care about, because we like the shiny things. And as I talk to my colleagues around the country, and we talk about different issues, when I tell them that we are having a community debate around drainage and paying for it in our city, they can't believe it. They cannot believe it, because they can't find ways to pay for the real infrastructure needs of their city. I'm going to give you a number. 3,000 homes. 3,000 homes in my district, City Park, North City Park, Cole, Clayton, and into Elyria, Swansea, will be protected because of this. That is protecting my constituents. And so I will be supporting this. Obviously, there's a lot of issues with the I-70. I live 10 blocks away from I-70, and I get those concerns, and many of the concerns from the group I actually agree with. Yes, this is an oppressive issue. But it's been interesting walking through the neighborhood, having these conversations through the last 2 months, and hearing what they're saying. And I think actually Councilman Lopez, he actually knew, he knocked on the doors back in the day, and a lot of people are saying some of the same things. Yes, I think the reroute would have been what we wanted, but we wanted this thing covered. We wanted it out the way. And there's a lot of miseducation from other individuals in the neighborhood about this project. I just had to show 4 homes in North City Park the design of the new golf course because they believe it was going to be completely cement because they believed their golf course was being destroyed. So, it's hard to have these conversations when we don't get a chance to bring everybody to the table. And this process was not perfect, but I think that we have, is far from perfect. I think that we have ended in a good place. I really like the design. I like the team that we're working with. I like that the architect, who I see right there, and I forgot your name, but you're looking good today. I'm glad you're here. Has worked on a large drainage project of this capacity in Palm Springs, not for a freeway, but the exact capacity. And it was incredible. And I asked him to send me all the information. Thank you for doing that. And he did. And so I will be supporting this. And I thank everyone for the smart dialogue that carried on today. But I'll be moving these bills forward. So, Madam Secretary, I just want to make sure it has been moved and seconded, and we are moving to adopt resolutions 23, 24, and 26. 823, 824, and 826. Is that correct, Madam Secretary?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Madam Secretary, roll call.
Black.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Espinosa.
No.
Flynn.
Aye.
Gilmore.
Aye.
Herndon.
Aye.
Cashman.
Nay.
Kinich.
Aye.
Lopez.
Aye.
Wait, New.
Aye.
Ortega.
No.
Sussman.
Aye.
Mr. President.
Aye. Please close the voting and announce the results.
10 ayes, 3 nays.
10 ayes, 3 nays, 823, 824, 826 have been adopted.